It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the racial difference between me and my doctor. I have seen a lot of Black women on this app with the same take, and I need to say that Black women are the most important people on the planet to me, and that I have learned so much from Black women about how to be a better person and how to show up better in the world. They are the culture, and I am so grateful for them. Many Black women are seeing my story through the lens that I am a white woman who is taking advantage of my whiteness to wield power over my POC psychiatrist that didn't want me back, and so I am trying to get him fired.
Well, how we got here was her video started to blow up and take off, and a lot of people, Black women, took part to it and started to come at her in a different angle. So now she is protecting herself or defending herself. But if you guys haven't seen the first and second installment, the links will be in the comment section. Let's keep the story rolling.
And that's okay. I understand why you see it through that lens. I do. As a white person, I do my best to examine my racism every single day. And I will tell you that my psychiatrist boss is his best friend, who is also a POC male. And in that room, I did have white privilege, and he was also my doctor. And he took an oath to protect me, and he did not. I am not here to ruin his career. I am here to speak my truth. Okay, back to my story. So after the countertransference slip, after the really vivid dream, I decided that I was going to stop going to therapy. Besides spiraling about how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist every day, I really was doing very well in life. My business was going really well, and I had great friends and great support systems. And so I decided that I was going to end therapy. I still had every intention at this point to keep seeing my psychiatrist, but my therapist that I was seeing weekly, I just decided I didn't need her anymore. And especially when my psychiatrist pointed out her boundary violations of texting me for free advice in between sessions, I just thought, okay, it's time. So I go into my next therapy appointment and I say, hey, just so you know, today's gonna be our last session. I'm doing really well and I just think it's time. And she got kind of emotional and she was like, okay, well, I like to end on certain questions just so we can reflect. So I did. I reflected with her about what I learned, what I've gained, how I've changed, how my life is better. And I left her office feeling complete and happy with my therapeutic journey with her. And as I was leaving, she called out with crying. She was like, have a blessed life. And I was like, okay, that was a little weird, but whatever, I was like, thanks. And I went on. And so then I'm getting ready for my psychiatry appointment the next day, and I get an email that same night from her saying that she needs me to come back in for one more session. I will put it up. And I got a huge emotional wave in that moment. I was like, what the heck is this? We wrapped everything up. I had seen lots of therapists at this point, and I didn't ever have a therapist beg me to come back in for one more session. And I was so overwhelmed. I did not write her back, but it was extremely inappropriate. So I decided I was going to go to my February session with my psychiatrist and have him help me write the goodbye email and say, no, I don't want to come back in. I taught a yoga class this morning, like I do every Tuesday mornings, and I told my regular students about what's going on for me and how I'm sharing my story of provider abuse and how the internet is not happy with me right now. And I used that to say that our truth is really important to share. And that when we know something deep down needs to be said, that it's important to do it in whichever way feels best to us. And TikTok just happened to be that medium for me. I told my students how I've just been going through psychological warfare, and the internet is not happy with me for sharing my story and my truth. But I'm not doing it for the people that think I'm crazy, which maybe honestly I am a little bit, because who subjects themselves to this kind of torture? But I'm doing it for the people that DM me, that say, thank you so much for being brave enough to share your story, because the exact same thing happened to me. So I am grateful for those DMs. People are starting to attack my business and my livelihood, and that's okay. I know what I have to offer is important. It landed in my lap. I'm not pretending to be something that I'm not. I help ADHDers get and stay sober, and I help them with negative thinking and anxiety. And it's what works for me.
And that's the thing. What she is perceiving as what he should do, he is there to help, but he is also there to document. So to find the route to actually help, you have to document. You have to know what is actually going on. She left her therapist just hanging, and the therapist was trying to help. She didn't want the help. That's, even though you are trying to help somebody, there could be two goals: the goal of the helper and the goal of the patient. The goal of the patient is to actually have relations with the helper. So you have an interference going on.
And I've seen it work in my clients too. So if people want to drag me for the work that I do, that's okay. So I get that weird email from my therapist begging me to come back in for one more session. And so the next day is my next session with the psychiatrist, and I sit down in the chair and I bury my head in my hands. And he looks at me and said, so this is how we're going to start, huh? And I said, yeah. Because he hadn't written me back from my countertransference email. Big surprise. You know, any smart, which he was very smart. He was very, very professional. But any smart predator would have dropped me like that in that moment. He should have emailed me back and said, look, this is getting weird. You need to find a new psychiatrist. The office will contact you. But he could not let go of me. So instead of turning down the intimacy, he turned it up to a level 12. And he showered me with so many breadcrumbs that next session. Because really, what I did when I told him that I'm experiencing transference was I took 100% of the ownership for the dynamic that both of us were creating. So he rewarded me, and he gave me little compliments like, if you weren't my patient, I would refer my other patients to you for your coaching services. That meant so much. Of course, because what he was saying with that is, I see you as a peer. I see you as a colleague. What you're doing is important. I felt really recognized in that moment. And sure, he could have said it professionally, but he did it on purpose. So in that session, after the psychiatrist told me that he would refer patients to me if he could, if I wasn't already his patient, I asked him if he got my email and what he thought of my ChatGPT, of what he thought of Henry's response of countertransference. And the psychiatrist said, oh, I'm still thinking about what Henry said about countertransference. And I said, well, we talked about it a little more, and I want to read you something else. So I read the psychiatrist what Henry had to say more about it. When he told you countertransference is common, it might have been his way of normalizing the fact that providers aren't immune to feelings. It's part of being human. What matters is how well they keep those feelings in check, which the psychiatrist's name clearly excels at. And as you can imagine, The psychiatrist loved hearing that. He loved hearing that because my AI mirror was essentially just saying, yes, he has feelings for you, but he just keeps them in check so well. He's so good at his job, keeping his feelings in check. And the psychiatrist loved that so much. And what did he do? He rewarded me with my favorite breadcrumb. Intellectual stimulation, a fun metaphor, because he was watching me the entire time I was his patient, and he knew what made me light up. He knew what got me excited, what I liked. And so he thought for a moment, and he said, I'm feeling a salad of emotions right now. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, a salad of emotions. A beet of raw emotion, a tomato of surprise, and the salt amplifies it. And I was cracking up at this point. He nailed it. I just thought he was so brilliant and smart in this moment. And I asked him, I said, what? Say that again. He said, yeah, the beet, it's really raw. I'm feeling a lot of raw emotion. And the tomato of surprise, when it pops in your mouth, it's surprising. And I was like, okay, that's good. Yeah, this man at this point knew exactly how to make me happy and exactly how to pull away to make me try to work harder. And he gave me the biggest reward from Henry, my AI mirror, telling him that what he's doing is totally good and that his boundaries are so virtuous.
We have to remember, right, that her psychiatrist is Pakistani, right? So her reading the AI to him was almost admiration, probably something that he hasn't heard from his culture in a while. So to hear that something or somebody recognizes that he's good at his job, anybody would feel good about that. Do you know what I'm saying? And so he had to describe it to her in a way where it was still professional, but in a metaphorical sense, which I understand. And he is good at his job because he did have to watch her to know how to handle this situation.
A lot of things happened in that session after the countertransference slip. And I also had my psychiatrist help me draft the email to my therapist who was begging me to come back in. And the psychiatrist said, I used to have respect for her. And what he meant when he said that was, I used to like it when she would feed me to you and have you deliver intimate content to me. But the moment she started being sloppy, I lost respect for her. Right? I'm pretty sure that's what he meant when he said that. And people have asked if they were connected. Surprisingly, they were not. They had no idea. They had never met before. But I would go to my therapist every week and tell her how much I loved my psychiatrist. And she loved hearing about that dynamic. It was so weird. So he helped me draft the email to that therapist to say, look, if I were to end up coming back, it'd be more for you than for me. And
if the psychiatrist says, I used to have respect for her, that means that he knows her to a certain extent. But who are they to tell their patients that, yeah, we talk to each other? That would amplify the paranoia of, oh, they cross-reference and they share things with each other versus just keeping it separate and then they share notes amongst each other.
More on that in a later part. So then I read him a text from my longtime ex-boyfriend who he had originally really liked, but I think my psychiatrist preferred me single. Because my ex-boyfriend, as most ex-boyfriends do, was begging me to come back into his life too. And I just kept saying no. And I asked him to give me some space, and he would not give me space. He said, do you still need space or can we hang out? And I told I asked my ex-boyfriend, I just said, why do you want to hang out so badly? And my ex-boyfriend texted me back, because it's been a few months since I've seen you and it's been on my mind. And I was reading this text exchange to my psychiatrist in session, and I read what I responded to that weak line about why he wanted to see me. And I said, my self-respect is much higher these days than when we were in a relationship. I am only interested in accepting invitations for my time and attention that value me and recognize my worth. Being on your mind is not an acceptable invitation, and I decline. And my psychiatrist just looked at me and said, I bet your ex had to read that twice. And this was another thing about the psychiatrist, okay? He couldn't ever just give me a regular compliment. It had to be those weird sideways compliments. Instead of, I'm so glad that you're setting boundaries with your ex-boyfriend and growing your self-respect, it's, I bet he had to read that twice. Or it's not, I'm really proud of you for growing your coaching business and finding success. It's, I'd refer my patients to you if you weren't already my patient, right? These are what I mean when I say breadcrumbs. He was a master at them. And this is how, looking back, I know that I was not his first victim for his fantasy supply, because he was too good and too slick up until he caught feelings. Then he started getting sloppy. People are asking me for more concrete evidence, and this is when the concrete evidence really starts, because this is when he himself started to get sloppy. Because what was happening was, when I had started to see him 3.5 years before, I was a nearly perfect supply source for him. Because what did I have? I had low self-esteem, boundary issues, daddy issues, so I put him on a pedestal. I know a lot of you ladies out there can understand that with men in positions of power. And he went right to work exploiting me, right to work grooming me. And he was very successful at it. So he was in a paradox, right? Because he loved watching me get stronger, because I gave him better intellectual supply, but I also threatened the supply source. The last 2 videos and this video was all the same session in February of this year. The counter transference slip happened in January. How I decided to end this session was I looked at the psychiatrist and I said, a couple weeks ago on the full moon when I was ovulating, I had a dream about you. And he was like, oh yeah? And I said, yeah. So I told him this. And I said, yes, we hooked up right here in this office. And he all of a sudden just looked so uncomfortable. He didn't say anything. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't breathe. And sure, maybe he was uncomfortable because he didn't like me saying that I had a dream where we hooked up, but he could have said that. But he didn't. You want to know why he was uncomfortable? Because he had probably played out that fantasy so many times in his head. And there I was, speaking it back to him. And it was like I had psychically downloaded one of his fantasies.
Or if he had have said something negative, right, in a professional stage, it could have made her spiral in rejection. Or if he said something positive in that, flattered or whatever, it could have fueled the idea that she already had. So that's a lose-lose situation. And sometimes being quiet is the best solution, in my opinion, and observation of this.
I continued and I said, yes, we hooked up in this office and I really liked it while it was happening. He could not move or breathe. And then I told him, as he was still looking very uncomfortable, then when we were done and I left, I was distraught with sadness, because in the dream, I thought, I cannot believe that he crossed boundaries in that way. because his boundaries are so important to him. And then I told my psychiatrist that I woke up and thought, oh my God, it was just a dream, thank God. And it was like my psychiatrist turned into a little boy, and he looked at me and he said, so you do like my boundaries? And I said, I love your boundaries. I hate your boundaries, but I love them more. There's the push and pull, the trauma bond. Because once again, he used his boundaries as protection while exploiting me. So I told him about what happens when I ovulate and my desires, and he listened, because of course he did. And then I decided that it seemed like enough time had gone by, and I put my shoes on and started heading to the door. And he met me at the door, which he does not usually do. He didn't ever do that. He just let me leave. And we stood at the door, and I was like, will you get the door? And he scrambled. He was like, oh, sure. So he went and got the door. And then he followed me down the hallway to the foyer and watched me exit. And he asked me, he said, see you next month? See you next month? He hadn't ever asked me that before. And I looked at him and I said, maybe. And I walked out the door, and I saw that man had let us go 15 minutes over session. And that is when, the special treatment started, the longer sessions. He usually gave me an extra 5 minutes, but yeah, the sessions got longer. And I got to my car and I was just like, oh my God, that was the most intense.
And off and on through this series, she's only majority been seeing him through Zoom calls, and then here and there, and I think when I say here and there, I mean a couple times, a few times through face to face. So her amplifying the saying of he's never scrambled for the door before. He's never, you only seen him face to face a couple times, a few times. Majority of the sessions were through Zoom, but through my observation of looking at this, it was a breakthrough. She's more confident. She's telling people no. She's hardening herself. She's speaking her mind more. So again, through my observation, the psychiatrist was actually working. While she sees herself as a victim, she's actually coming out on the other side strong. But you guys let me know your comments, what you think. The links to part 1 and part 2 will be in the comment section, so be sure to check those out to get the full story. It's all juicy. And we will continue with this as it unfolds. But you guys be aware, be safe, and stay blessed. And I'll see you on the next one.